The champagne flute slipped from Diane Harper's fingers, shattering against the restaurant's marble floor in a crystalline explosion that seemed to fracture time itself. Across the crowded dining room, through the forest of designer-clad bodies and flickering candlelight, she saw what couldn't exist, what had been buried 6 years ago in a white casket too small for the universe's cruelty. Her daughter, Maya, alive, laughing, pregnant, holding the hand of Diane's husband, Marcus, as he kissed her temple with the tenderness of a man who'd never stopped loving. The room spun. Diane's lungs forgot how to process air. Because Maya had drowned during a family cruise in 2018, her body recovered from the Caribbean's indifferent waters, her funeral attended by 300 people who'd wept for a light extinguished too soon. Yet here she stood, radiant in a crimson dress that hugged the swell of new life, her smile identical to the one Diane had kissed goodnight that last evening before everything ended. The question burned through Diane's chest like acid. What truth had she buried alongside that coffin? Welcome back to Crime Radio, where we go deep into the darkest corners of human nature. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. And if you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Diane Marie Harper, born April 12, 1976, in Charleston, South Carolina, had built her identity on two foundations: excellence and control. At 46, she commanded respect as one of Chicago's most successful corporate attorneys, a black woman who'd shattered glass ceilings with the precision of a diamond cutter. Her natural hair, now worn in elegant silver-streaked locks, framed a face that had learned to reveal nothing it didn't choose to show. Colleagues described her as formidable. Clients called her a warrior. But in the hollow of 3 a.m., when sleep refused its mercy, Diane was simply a mother whose arms remembered the weight they'd never hold again. She lived in the kind of Lincoln Park brownstone that whispered old money and new achievement, exposed brick, original hardwood floors, a kitchen with marble countertops that had never known the chaos of a child's birthday cake. The absence of Maya had fossilized the home into a museum. Diane kept her daughter's room exactly as it had been: the lavender walls, the debate team trophies, the college acceptance letters from Howard and Spelman still pinned to the corkboard. Sometimes she'd stand in the doorway, breathing the fading scent of cocoa butter and teenage dreams, wondering if grief was a choice she kept making or a sentence without parole. Maya Simone Harper, born September 3, 1998, in Chicago, Illinois, had been 17 when the ocean claimed her, a junior at Whitney Young High School, with her mother's sharp mind and her father's easy charm. She'd inherited Diane's high cheekbones and determined jaw, but her personality had bloomed softer, more open. Maya loved poetry, especially Gwendolyn Brooks and Nikki Giovanni. She'd wanted to study political science, to become the kind of lawyer who defended the defenseless rather than corporations. The last conversation they'd had, standing on the cruise ship's deck as sunset painted the water gold, had been about college applications. Maya had been excited, alive, completely, devastatingly alive. Marcus Anthony Harper, born January 28, 1974, in Atlanta, Georgia, had once been Diane's perfect counterpart. The warmth to her calculated cool, the spontaneity to her careful planning. An architect who specialized in sustainable urban design, Marcus had the kind of genuine charisma that made strangers feel like old friends. His dark skin, kept impeccably groomed, and his athletic build suggested a man who took care of himself. But grief had carved new lines around his eyes, lines that deepened whenever anyone mentioned Maya's name. They'd met at Morehouse during a mixer in 1994, she a junior at Spelman, he a senior, with dreams of redesigning black neighborhoods into thriving communities. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of intellectual debates and stolen kisses in Atlanta's humid summers. Marriage came in 1997, Maya 9 months later, and for nearly 2 decades, they'd been the couple others envied. Successful, attractive, seemingly unshakable. The cruise had been Marcus's idea, a family vacation to celebrate Maya's acceptance into multiple universities, a chance to reconnect before she left for college. The Caribbean monarch, a floating palace of excess, had promised 7 days of paradise. Instead, it had delivered an eternity of hell. Now, 6 years after the Coast Guard had recovered Maya's body from waters too deep for comfort, Diane and Marcus existed in separate orbits within the same house. They spoke in polite necessities. They slept in separate rooms. The marriage had become a ghost, haunting the space where love had once lived. Divorce had been discussed, but never executed. Neither had the energy to kill what had already died. Tonight was supposed to be different. Marcus had called her office at 4 p.m., his voice carrying an unfamiliar lightness. "Dinner. That new place on Michigan Avenue. I think we should talk." Something in his tone had made Diane agree. Hope, perhaps, or masochism. She'd worn her burgundy suit, the one that made her feel powerful, and met him at Essence, a upscale black-owned restaurant known for its modern take on Southern cuisine. The maître d' had seated them by the window. Marcus had ordered wine. They'd made small talk about his latest project, a community center in Bronzeville. For 30 minutes, Diane had almost remembered what it felt like to be a wife instead of a widow. Then Marcus had excused himself to the restroom, and Diane had let her gaze wander across the restaurant's opulent interior, and that's when her entire reality had detonated. Maya. Not a ghost, not a hallucination. Flesh and blood and impossible. Her daughter sat at a table in the far corner, partially obscured by a decorative column wrapped in climbing orchids. But Diane would know that profile anywhere. The elegant slope of her nose, the way she tucked her hair behind her left ear when she listened intently, the exact tilt of her head when she laughed. Maya wore a crimson wrap dress that accentuated her pregnant belly, maybe 6 or 7 months along. Across from her sat Marcus, leaning forward with an intimacy that transcended casual dining, his hand covering hers on the white tablecloth. Diane's champagne flute fell. The sound of shattering glass seemed to come from very far away. The Harper family story had always been one of ascension against America's gravitational pull. Diane's grandparents had been sharecroppers in South Carolina. Their daughter, Diane's mother, the first to finish high school. Diane herself had clawed her way through Spelman on scholarships and spite. Then, Columbia Law on loans she'd spent 15 years repaying. She'd learned early that black excellence wasn't optional. It was armor. Every achievement became a brick in the wall protecting her from a world eager to confirm its lowest expectations. Marcus's journey had been different, but parallel. His father had owned a small construction business in Atlanta, building homes in black neighborhoods when white contractors wouldn't. Young Marcus had learned to read blueprints before he could read chapter books, but his dreams had stretched beyond his father's limitations. He'd wanted to design buildings that made people's lives better, that proved architecture could heal communities the government had abandoned. Morehouse had given him the tools. Diane had given him the courage to dream bigger. Their marriage had been a partnership of equals, rare in their generation and social circle. Diane made partner at her firm in 2006, the only black woman in a sea of white faces. Marcus's sustainable housing project in Inglewood had won national recognition in 2010. They'd moved into the Lincoln Park brownstone in 2008, the kind of neighborhood where they were often the only black family at block parties, where white neighbors complimented their articulate speech with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Maya had been their greatest achievement, not because she was exceptional, though she was, but because she'd been happy. In a world designed to crush black children's spirits, Maya had bloomed. She'd attended the best schools, made friends across racial lines, excelled at debate, where her natural eloquence made judges weep. Diane had watched her daughter navigate spaces she herself had barely survived, and felt something like redemption. But perfection had fault lines. Marcus had been traveling more in the year before the cruise. Client meetings, he'd say, kissing Diane's forehead before disappearing for 3-day trips to Miami, Houston, New Orleans. Diane, consumed by a pharmaceutical company case that demanded 80-hour weeks, had barely noticed. Their marriage had become a business arrangement, 2 CEOs managing a successful enterprise called family. Maya had noticed. Teenagers see what adults hide. "Are you and Dad okay?" she'd asked one evening, catching Diane alone in the kitchen. Diane had deflected with practiced ease. "Of course, baby. Why do you ask?" Maya had shrugged, but her eyes had held knowledge beyond her years. "He seems different, distracted." Diane had dismissed it. Marcus was stressed about a project. Men went through phases. Their foundation was solid. Wasn't it? The cruise had been booked, suddenly. Marcus had presented it as a spontaneous celebration. But looking back, Diane recognized the manic energy of a man running from something. They'd boarded the Caribbean Monarch in Fort Lauderdale on a humid June morning, joining 3,000 other passengers seeking escape in international waters. The ship was a floating city of excess: 12 decks, 4 pools, a casino, Broadway-style shows, restaurants serving cuisines from every colonized culture. They'd been assigned a suite on Deck 10, with a balcony overlooking the endless blue. Maya had immediately commandeered the second bedroom, spreading her books and journals across every surface. The first 3 days had been pleasant enough. They'd explored ports in Cozumel and Jamaica, where aggressive vendors sold authentic crafts made in factories. Marcus had seemed almost manic in his cheerfulness, insisting they try every activity: snorkeling, zip-lining, a cooking class where they'd made jerk chicken. Maya had gone along with good-natured tolerance, though Diane had caught her texting constantly, her face illuminated by her phone's glow as she smiled at messages she didn't share. Diane, for her part, had tried to relax. She'd sat by the pool reading case files, attended a wine tasting, even joined Marcus for a couples massage, where the therapist's hands had found knots of tension Diane hadn't known existed. The 4th evening, everything had shifted. They'd planned to attend the ship's formal dinner, but Maya had complained of a headache. "You guys go," she'd insisted. "I'll just rest, and maybe grab room service later." Diane had hesitated, maternal instinct sensing something off, but Marcus had been insistent. Let her have some space. She's 17, not 7. So they'd gone to dinner. Diane had worn her black evening gown, the one that made her feel like she could conquer worlds. The formal dining room had been magnificent: crystal chandeliers, white-gloved waiters, a pianist playing Coltrane. They'd been seated with another couple, both white, both tediously eager to discuss their vacation home in Tuscany. Dinner had lasted 2 hours. When they'd returned to their suite around 10 p.m., Maya's bedroom door had been closed. Diane had knocked. No answer. Assuming her daughter was asleep, they'd gone to bed. The next morning, Maya's bed had been empty, neatly made, as if never slept in. The restaurant's ambient noise, clinking silverware, orchestral jazz, the murmur of wealth at leisure, faded to a distant hum as Diane's vision tunneled. She stood on legs that felt borrowed, navigating between tables with the mechanical precision of a woman whose nervous system had short-circuited. Waiters blurred into dark shapes. Other diners became faceless obstacles. Only Maya remained in focus, growing larger and more impossible with each step. This isn't real. Brain tumor. Psychotic break. Early onset dementia. Anything but this. But Diane's legal mind, trained to dissect reality with ruthless objectivity, cataloged details that hallucinations couldn't manufacture. The way Maya's fingernails were painted burgundy, she'd always preferred dark colors. The small scar above her right eyebrow from when she'd fallen off her bike at 9. The exact angle at which she held her water glass tilted slightly left. Even her perfume, something floral with vanilla undertones, carried across the space between them, familiar as breathing. Marcus saw her first. His expression flickered through a rapid sequence: confusion, recognition, horror, and something else. Something that looked disturbingly like guilt. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against marble. "Diane." Maya turned. For one suspended moment, mother and daughter locked eyes across the crowded restaurant. Maya's face drained of color. Her lips parted in a silent gasp. Her hand, the one not holding Marcus's, moved instinctively to protect her swollen belly. Diane stopped 3 feet away. Her voice, when it emerged, belonged to someone else. "Maya." The young woman's eyes, Maya's eyes, that specific shade of amber inherited from Diane's grandmother, filled with tears. "Mom." The word was barely a whisper, carried on a breath that held 6 years of ghosts. The world tilted. Diane felt her knees begin to buckle. Marcus moved toward her, but she raised a hand, stopping him with a look that could have flash-frozen lava. "Don't." The word came out blade sharp. "Don't you fucking dare touch me." Other diners had begun to notice the commotion. A waiter approached hesitantly. Marcus waved him away with a tight smile, the kind he'd perfected in predominantly white spaces. "Everything's fine, no problem here. Just black folks working through our issues." Diane's mind worked feverishly, trying to construct a narrative that didn't indict everyone she'd ever loved. Maybe this was a different girl who just looked like Maya. Maybe she'd suffered some trauma-induced delusion. Maybe. But Maya stood, and the way she moved was unmistakable. That slight favor of her left leg from a childhood soccer injury. The unconscious habit of smoothing her dress over her thighs. The exact posture Diane had corrected 1,000 times. "Shoulders back, baby. We don't shrink." "We need to go somewhere private," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Please, Diane, not here." "Not here." Diane's laugh emerged sharp and fractured. "Not here? You're having dinner with our daughter who's been dead for 6 years, and you're worried about making a scene." Her voice had risen. Several nearby tables had turned to watch, their faces reflecting varying degrees of discomfort and curiosity. Maya stepped forward. "Mama, please." The childhood endearment detonated something in Diane's chest. "I can explain. I need to explain. Just not like this." "Explain what?" Diane demanded. "Explain how I buried you, how I stood over your casket and wanted to crawl in with you, how I've spent 6 years, 6 fucking years, wanting to die because you did?" Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. "Explain how you're alive and pregnant and having dinner with my husband while I—" She couldn't finish. The magnitude of the betrayal was too immense for language. The restaurant manager materialized. A thin white man in an expensive suit, his smile professional and meaningless. "Is everything all right here? Perhaps we could—" "We're leaving," Marcus interrupted. He pulled out his wallet, dropped several $100 bills on the table with the carelessness of a man for whom money had lost all meaning. "Diane, I have a car outside. Come with us. We'll go somewhere we can talk." "A car," Diane repeated slowly. "You have a car outside. This was planned. You brought me here, to this specific restaurant, knowing she'd be here. Knowing I'd—" The realization hit with physical force. "You wanted me to find out. This was the talk you mentioned." Marcus's silence confirmed it. Diane looked at Maya again, really looked. The pregnancy was obvious now, her daughter's body transformed by the ancient magic of creating life. 6, maybe 7 months along, which meant Maya had been alive, had been with Marcus, had been building a new existence while Diane had been dying slowly in a house full of ghosts. "Whose?" Diane asked. "Whose baby is it?" Maya's hand tightened protectively over her belly. She glanced at Marcus, and in that glance, Diane saw a lifetime of secrets, of intimacy, of shared knowledge that excluded her. "Please," Maya whispered. "Not here. Come with us." Every instinct screamed for Diane to run, to flee this nightmare and wake up in her own bed, alone, but certain of reality's boundaries. But she was a lawyer. She'd built her life on confronting hard truths, and the only thing worse than knowing would be not knowing. "Fine," she said. "We'll talk. But I'm driving myself. I'm not getting in a car with either of you." She gave them the address of a place she knew would be empty this time of night, her law firm's conference room on the 43rd floor of the Willis Tower. Neutral ground. No witnesses. No escape. As Diane walked out of Essence, she caught a reflection in the restaurant's glass doors. The woman staring back looked decades older than she had an hour ago, her face carved by a grief that had just discovered it had been wasted on a lie. Behind her, through the glass, she saw Marcus put his arm around Maya's shoulders. Protective, possessive, intimate. And that's when the first terrible suspicion began to crystallize. What if Maya hadn't drowned? What if she'd run? And what if Marcus had helped her? The law firm's conference room occupied the entire north corner of the 43rd floor, offering panoramic views of Chicago's glittering sprawl. At 9 p.m., the space was deserted, the only light coming from the city outside and the motion-activated overheads that flickered to life as Diane entered, using her security card. She'd called Marcus from her car, given him the address and her firm's suite number, then driven through Chicago's grid of streets seeing nothing, her body operating on autopilot, while her mind tried to process an impossibility. Maya is alive. Maya has been alive for 6 years. Marcus knew. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching miniature people 43 stories below navigate their ordinary lives, going to late dinners, hailing cabs, arguing or laughing or falling in love. Normal people living in a world where dead daughters stayed dead, where reality followed rules. The elevator chimed. Diane didn't turn. Footsteps on polished marble. 2 sets, one heavier than the other. Marcus and Maya entering the space that Diane had commanded in 100 high-stakes negotiations, where she'd dismantled opponents with surgical precision. Now she stood on the same battlefield, but the enemy was her own life. "Diane," Marcus began. 6 years, she interrupted, still not turning. "I need to know one thing before you explain anything else. How long have you known?" Silence. Then, "Since the beginning." Diane closed her eyes. The city lights blurred behind her eyelids, becoming stars, becoming nothing. "Since the beginning," she repeated. "Which beginning? Since the day she supposedly drowned? Since the funeral? Since I cried myself unconscious on our bedroom floor every night for a year?" "Mama." Maya's voice, closer now. "Daddy helped me. I asked him to. I begged him to." Finally, Diane turned. They stood in the center of the conference room, Marcus looking haggard despite his expensive suit, Maya radiant despite the devastation she'd brought. Mother and daughter faced each other across an expanse of Italian marble that might as well have been the Atlantic Ocean. "You asked him to fake your death." Diane heard the hysteria creeping into her voice and didn't care. "You asked him to let me believe you drowned? To let me identify a body?" She stopped, a new horror dawning. The body. Whose body did I bury? Marcus stepped forward. It was a Jane Doe from Miami's morgue, a black girl, approximate age, similar build. The Coast Guard never found Maya because she was never in the water. She'd already left the ship. How? The word was barely audible. Marcus pulled out a chair, gestured for Diane to sit. She remained standing, rigid as stone, He sighed and sat himself, suddenly looking every one of his 48 years. I'd been planning it for months, since March, actually. Maya came to me, told me she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't be your daughter, couldn't live up to the expectations, couldn't breathe. That's bullshit, Diane snapped. Maya loved her life. She was happy. I was suffocating, Maya said quietly. Every day felt like a performance. Perfect grades. Perfect daughter. Perfect example of what a black girl should be. I couldn't make mistakes. Couldn't be messy or confused or just human. Because you needed me to be excellent, to prove something to a world that already hated us. Diane felt like she'd been struck. I was protecting you. I was teaching you how to survive. You were teaching me how to disappear into a role. Maya moved closer, her pregnant belly leading. Do you know why I was on my phone so much during that cruise? I was texting Daddy. We were coordinating. When you guys went to dinner that night, I took a private water taxi to Grand Cayman. Daddy had arranged everything. Fake passport, plane tickets, an apartment in Seattle. By the time you realized I was gone, I was already in the air. But the investigation, Diane stammered. The Coast Guard, the FBI, they looked for you for days. They looked for a girl who'd fallen overboard, Marcus said. Not for one who'd left voluntarily. I'd paid off one of the cruise staff to claim they'd seen someone matching Maya's description near the railing around midnight. Another passenger remembered seeing her drinking at the bar earlier, implying intoxication. The ship's security footage was mysteriously corrupted for that deck during the relevant hours. Cost me $50,000 in bribes, but it worked. Diane sank into a chair, her legs finally giving out. The body. I identified a body. I touched her face. The body had been in the water for 3 days by the time it was recovered, Marcus explained, his voice clinical. Decomposition had begun. The face was swollen, discolored. The medical examiner said positive ID based on physical examination alone was impossible. But the height, weight, and age matched. I confirmed what they expected to hear. You were sedated when they asked you to identify her. I made sure of that. You sedated me? Dr. Morrison gave you something for the shock. I just suggested a higher dose. Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. I couldn't risk you looking too closely. The room spun. Diane gripped the conference table's edge, anchoring herself to something solid. The DNA test. They ran a DNA comparison against the hairbrush from her cabin. My hair on that brush had been replaced with samples from the Jane Doe, Maya said. Daddy switched them out the morning we reported me missing. The test matched what they had on file, so no one questioned it. Diane's legal mind finally engaged, analyzing the conspiracy's mechanics with reluctant admiration. You couldn't have done this alone. Who else knew? Just us, Marcus insisted. Well, us and a few well-compensated people who asked no questions. The taxi operator in Grand Cayman, a corrupt cruise employee, the funeral home director who handled the body before the sealed casket service. He knew it wasn't Maya, but didn't know who it actually was. And Seattle, Diane demanded. You've been in Seattle for 6 years? Maya nodded. At first. Daddy set me up with enough money to live on while I figured things out. I worked at coffee shops, went to community college. Eventually, I started writing. Poetry, essays, freelance journalism. I found a life where I could just be Maya, not Diane Harper's daughter, or proof of black excellence, or any of the other things people needed me to be. And him? Diane pointed at Marcus. Where does he fit in this new life? The silence that followed was answer enough. Maya placed her hand over Marcus's. He visited every few months at first, to check on me, to make sure I was okay. Then the visits got longer, more frequent. We'd have dinner, talk about everything. He was the only person who knew all of me, the before and the after. And somewhere in all that, you fell in love, Diane finished flatly. "With your father." "He's not my father." The words exploded from Maya with shocking violence. "He never was. That's what I tried to tell you on that cruise. What I'd been trying to tell you for years. But you never listened. You were always too busy, too focused on your cases, too determined to build your perfect life to see what was right in front of you." Diane's blood turned to ice. "What are you saying?" Marcus stood, walked to the windows. When he spoke, his back was to both women. "I met your mother in 1994. We married in 1997. Maya was born in 1998. He paused. "But Maya wasn't conceived during our marriage. She was conceived before we even met." The city outside became a watercolor, running and bleeding. "No. Your mother had an affair," Marcus continued, his voice hollow. "Brief thing, during her junior year at Spelman. A visiting professor from Nigeria. Married, older, absolutely inappropriate. When she discovered she was pregnant, he'd already returned to Lagos. She never told him. Never told anyone except her roommate." "And that roommate," Diane whispered, "was your sister, Aisha." Marcus nodded. "Aisha was Vanessa's best friend. She knew everything. When I started dating Vanessa our senior year, she warned me. Told me Vanessa had a 6-month-old daughter. She'd given up for adoption to her own cousin in South Carolina because she couldn't handle raising a baby while finishing school." Maya picked up the thread. "My biological mother was your cousin Vanessa, the woman you always said was more like a sister. She gave me to her aunt, your mother, who raised me for the first 2 years. And when your mother got sick with cancer, Vanessa begged you and Marcus to adopt me." Diane's memories rearranged themselves, the familiar becoming strange. She'd been 23, freshly married, when her mother had called asking if she and Marcus could take Maya. "Just temporarily," she'd said, "until Vanessa gets on her feet." But Vanessa had never gotten on her feet. She'd died in a car accident in 2003, and Diane had officially adopted Maya, believing she was raising her cousin's orphaned child, never questioning the story. "You knew?" Diane looked at Marcus. "You've always known she wasn't biologically ours?" "Yes, but I loved her anyway. I raised her. I was her father in every way that mattered." Marcus finally turned from the window. "Until 5 years ago, when everything changed." "What changed?" Maya and Marcus exchanged a look that made Diane's stomach turn. "We were in the car," Maya said softly. "I was 16. We were driving back from a college visit to Northwestern. Daddy pulled over because he was upset, crying. I'd never seen him like that. He told me that you'd accused him of cheating, that you'd found text messages, hotel receipts, that our marriage was dying." Diane remembered that period, the suspicions, the evidence, the confrontation that had left their relationship fractured. "I was so angry at you," Maya continued, "at how you treated him, at how you were never home, never present, at how you'd turned our family into a resume item. And in that moment, in the car, I hugged him, just to comfort him. And then," she trailed off. "And then?" Diane demanded, though she already knew. "I kissed him," Maya whispered. "I initiated it. He pulled away immediately, told me it was wrong, that he was my father. And I said, 'But you're not. Not really.' And I kissed him again. The conference room's walls seemed to contract, pressing in. You were 16. "Nothing happened," Marcus insisted. "I stopped it. I told her we could never. That it was inappropriate, illegal, immoral. I loved her, but not like that. Never like that. But I loved you like that," Maya said. "I'd loved you like that for years, maybe always. The man who actually saw me, who let me be imperfect, who never demanded I be anything but myself. And once I'd admitted it, I couldn't unknow it. Living in the same house with you, pretending to be your daughter, it was torture." Diane stood abruptly, her chair clattering backward. So your solution was to fake your death, to let me mourn you, to traumatize me so completely that I could barely function for years? All because you had an inappropriate crush on your adoptive father? It wasn't a crush, Maya's eyes flashed, and I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it to save myself. I was 17, confused, drowning in expectations and feelings I couldn't process. I thought if I just disappeared, if I started over somewhere else, maybe I could figure out who I was without being your daughter, or in love with Daddy, or any of it. And when did the relationship actually start? Diane asked Marcus. When did you stop being her father and start fucking her? Marcus flinched. She was 23. We hadn't seen each other in 6 years. I went to Seattle for a conference, and I looked her up, just to see if she was okay. We met for coffee. She'd changed, grown up, become this incredible woman. And she told me she still felt the same way, that she'd tried to move on but couldn't. So you seduced her. I tried to leave. Marcus's voice rose. I told her it was still wrong, still impossible. But she said, I'm not your daughter. I never was. You have no legal or biological tie to me. We're just two adults who've known each other. And she was right. Legally, morally, there was no actual impediment. Just the history. Just the appearance. Just the fact that I believed you were her father, Diane hissed. Just the fact that I've been mourning a daughter who's been alive and pregnant with her adoptive father's child. Maya's hand moved to her belly again. It's not like that. Marcus and I, we're partners. Equals. This baby, her voice softened, this baby is wanted. Loved. Created by two people who chose each other freely, without expectations or obligations. Diane laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. You think this is freedom? You think running away, hiding for 6 years, building a relationship on the foundation of my pain, you think that's freedom? It's more freedom than I ever had with you, Maya shot back. When was the last time you asked what I wanted, what I dreamed about? You were so busy sculpting me into your image of black excellence that you never considered I might want something different. Might want to write poetry instead of practice law. Might want a simple life instead of a spectacular one. I gave you everything. You gave me pressure, Maya's voice cracked. You gave me impossible standards and constant judgment, and a mother who loved the idea of me more than the reality. Do you know what my first memory of you is? I was 4, and I'd drawn you a picture at preschool. You looked at it for 3 seconds and said, "The proportions are off. Next time, think about perspective." I was 4, Mom, but you couldn't even let me have that. Couldn't let me be a child making an imperfect drawing for her mother. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Diane wanted to argue, to deny, to justify. But memories surfaced unbidden. Maya at 6, crying because her science project wasn't good enough. Maya at 10, practicing her violin until her fingers bled. Maya at 14, having a panic attack before a debate tournament because she couldn't let you down. I was preparing you, Diane whispered, for a world that would judge you twice as harshly for being black and female. I couldn't let you be mediocre. Mediocre gets black girls killed. And excellence gets them buried alive, Maya replied quietly, just in a different way. The 3 of them stood in the conference room, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly seemed hollow. Outside, the city continued its indifferent sprawl, unconcerned with the implosion happening, 43 stories above. So what now? Diane asked. Why tell me? Why after 6 years of letting me believe you were dead? Marcus and Maya exchanged another glance. Because we're getting married, Marcus said. In 2 weeks. And we wanted to invite you. Diane didn't remember leaving the conference room. One moment she was standing amid the wreckage of her life. The next, she was in her car, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles as Chicago blurred past. She drove without destination, navigating the grid of streets on autopilot, while her mind spun through the rubble of everything she'd believed. Maya was alive. Maya was pregnant. Maya was marrying Marcus. And Diane had spent 6 years mourning a daughter who'd been living a separate life, building a future that explicitly excluded her. She found herself in Bronzeville, parked outside the community center Marcus had designed. Even at 11 p.m., lights blazed in some windows. After-school programs, support groups, the kind of neighborhood infrastructure that made Marcus's name synonymous with hope. Diane stared at the building's clean lines and sustainable materials, wondering how many other lies had been built into structures she'd thought she understood. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Please don't do anything rash. We can talk more tomorrow. I know you're hurt, but there's more to explain." More? What possible detail could make this nightmare cohere into something survivable? She ignored the text and called the one person whose judgment she trusted. Keisha Washington, born May 15, 1975, in Detroit, Michigan. Her best friend since Columbia Law. Keisha had been Maya's godmother, had wept at the funeral, had helped Diane survive the first terrible year. If anyone deserved to know the truth, it was her. Keisha answered on the second ring. "Dee, it's almost midnight. What's wrong?" "Maya's alive." The words fell out flat and factual. A long pause. "What?" "She's alive. She's been alive. Marcus helped her fake her death. They're together now. Romantically. She's pregnant with his child. They're getting married in 2 weeks." Diane delivered the information like she was reading a deposition, her voice stripped of emotion. "I'm coming over," Keisha said immediately. "Stay where you are. I'm in Bronzeville, outside that community center Marcus designed. I'll be there in 15. Don't move. Don't call anyone else. And for God's sake, don't drive." Keisha arrived in 12 minutes, her silver BMW screeching to a halt beside Diane's car. She was still in her pajamas, silk pants, and a Howard t-shirt, her locks wrapped in a silk scarf. She climbed into Diane's passenger seat without preamble. "Explain. Everything. From the beginning." Diane did. She recounted the restaurant, the confrontation, the revelations about Maya's biological origins, the timeline of the affair that wasn't technically an affair, because Maya wasn't technically Marcus's daughter. Keisha listened, without interruption, her face cycling through disbelief, horror, and something approaching murderous rage. When Diane finished, Keisha was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That motherfucker." "Which one?" Diane asked. "The man who helped a teenage girl fake her death? Or the girl who let her mother grieve for 6 years?" "Both," Keisha said flatly. "But mostly Marcus. He was the adult. When Maya kissed him at 16, his job was to establish boundaries, get her therapy, figure out what was causing the inappropriate attachment. Not to facilitate her disappearance, and then enter into a relationship with her the moment it became legally permissible." She said nothing happened until she was 23. "And you believe that?" Keisha's tone was sharp. "Dee, I love you, but your naivete is showing. Marcus has been lying to you for 6 years about something enormous. You think he's suddenly become honest about the timeline of his relationship with Maya?" Doubt crept in. "You think they were together before she turned 18? I think a 42-year-old man who helps a 17-year-old run away from home is not making good decisions. And I think the power dynamic between them has always been fucked, regardless of legal technicalities about adoption and biology." Diane's stomach churned. If they were together when she was underage, that's statutory rape. In Illinois, the age of consent is 17, but there are provisions about positions of trust and authority. "You're thinking like a lawyer," Keisha interrupted. "Stop. Think like a mother. Think like a woman whose husband and daughter conspired to gaslight her for 6 years. Keisha was right. Diane had immediately shifted into analytical mode, examining legal frameworks instead of emotional realities. It was her default defense mechanism. When feelings became overwhelming, retreat into logic. "I need to know the truth," Diane said. "The actual truth, not the version they're selling. If Marcus was involved with Maya when she was a minor, if any of their story doesn't hold up." "What will you do with that information?" Keisha asked carefully. "Prosecute him? Expose them? Get revenge? I don't know." Diane rubbed her temples, feeling a headache forming behind her eyes. "I just know I can't accept what they told me at face value. There are too many convenient elisions, too much that doesn't make sense." "Like what?" "Like money. Marcus set Maya up with enough to live on in Seattle. That's not a small amount for a 17-year-old to survive on for months, maybe years. Where did it come from? We had joint accounts. I reviewed our finances. I would have noticed large withdrawals." Keisha nodded slowly. "So he had a separate account? Or he liquidated assets you didn't know about?" "And the visits," Diane continued, momentum building. "He said he visited Maya every few months over the years. But I would have noticed extended absences. The longest Marcus was ever. Gone was a week, maybe 2 for major projects. If he was regularly flying to Seattle." "He was lying about where he was going," Keisha finished. "Those client meetings in Miami and Houston? Probably layovers on the way to Seattle." Diane's mind raced, reconstructing the past 6 years through a new lens. The late nights Marcus had spent at the office, the weekend conferences he'd attended alone, the way he'd sometimes returned from trips with a lightness that had seemed incongruous given he was supposedly grieving their daughter. "I need to see his financial records," Diane said. "His credit card statements, bank accounts, everything. And Maya's too. If they've been together as long as they claim, there will be a paper trail." "You want to investigate your own husband?" "Ex-husband?" The words came out with finality. "As of right now, in my mind, we're done. I don't know if I'll file papers immediately, but the marriage is over. And yes, I want to investigate. Because either they're telling the truth and my daughter faked her death to escape me, which means I'm a monster, or they're lying, which means they're monsters. Either way, I need to know." Keisha reached over and squeezed Diane's hand. "Okay, what do you need from me? You still have that friend at the FBI? The one who worked on Maya's case?" "Darren Hughes. Yeah, he's still around." "I want to know what the official file says. What evidence was collected? What made them close the investigation as an accidental drowning? There has to be something they missed. And if there isn't, if Marcus really covered his tracks that well, then I hire a private investigator. I use every resource at my disposal. Keisha, these people let me bury a stranger. They let me stand at a gravestone and talk to an empty coffin. They let me break." Diane's voice hardened. "Whatever I find, whatever it costs, I'm going to make sure the truth comes out." Even if the truth destroys Maya, Diane met her friend's eyes. Especially then? The next morning, Diane called in sick to work, the first time she'd done so in 15 years. She spent the day in her home office, surrounded by file boxes she'd pulled from the basement. Maya's investigation file, financial records from the period surrounding the cruise, Marcus's travel itineraries. She started with credit card statements from March through July 2016. Marcus's charges showed the expected pattern: gas stations, restaurants, Home Depot for project supplies. But there were anomalies. A $2,500 charge to something called Pacific Holdings LLC in March, another $3,000 to Emerald City Consulting in April, 2 charges to a Seattle hotel in May, weeks before the cruise. Diane cross-referenced against Marcus's travel calendar. He'd claimed to be in Houston those May dates, but the hotel charges placed him in Seattle. She found more discrepancies. Wire transfers to an account she didn't recognize. $10,000 in March, $15,000 in April. Withdrawals in cash, unusual amounts, taken from an ATM near O'Hare Airport. By evening, she'd constructed a timeline that diverged significantly from Marcus's story. The planning had started not in March, but in January, based on emails she found in old backups. Emails between Marcus and someone named J. Morrison, not the family's regular doctor, but someone else. The emails were vague, discussing arrangements and timing and making sure everyone is protected. She texted Keisha, "Found something. Come over." While she waited, Diane pulled out her laptop and did what she should have done 6 years ago. A deep background check on the Jane Doe who'd supposedly been misidentified as Maya. The Miami-Dade County Medical Examiner's report was public record. The body had been recovered from Biscayne Bay on June 12, 2016, 3 days after Maya's disappearance was reported. Estimated age, 16 to 19. Cause of death, drowning. Identifying marks, none notable. But the DNA report included an interesting detail. The sample had been submitted by the cruise line's private medical facility, not by the Coast Guard or any official law enforcement agency. And the chain of custody showed a gap. 12 hours when the sample had been in transit, but not logged into any official system. 12 hours. Plenty of time for Marcus to switch samples. Keisha arrived to find Diane surrounded by papers, her whiteboard covered in timelines and connections drawn in red marker. "Jesus, Dee, you look like you're profiling a serial killer." "I'm profiling my husband," Diane replied, "and my daughter, who apparently are both very good at deception." She walked Keisha through her findings, the financial irregularities, the fake companies that were probably just fronts for moving money, the suspicious DNA chain of custody, the emails with the mysterious J. Morrison. "I think they're lying about the timeline," Diane concluded. "I think the relationship started before Maya turned 18, maybe even before she died. And I think there are other people involved, accomplices we don't know about yet." "Can you prove it?" Keisha asked. "Not yet, but I'm going to." Diane's expression was granite. "I'm meeting with Darren tomorrow, and I'm hiring a PI to surveil them. If they're planning a wedding, there are details to manage. Venues, caterers, invitations. Someone will slip up." Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mom, please don't make this ugly. We want to include you, but only if you can accept us. Love, Maya." Diane stared at the message. The sheer audacity of it, asking her to accept the situation, as if she were the unreasonable one, ignited something cold and furious in her chest. She typed back, "I will never accept what you've done, but I will uncover the truth. All of it." She hit send and blocked the number. Keisha watched her warily. "What are you planning, Dee?" "Justice," Diane said simply. "Or revenge. I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." In the weeks that followed, Diane became someone she didn't recognize. The transformation happened gradually, then all at once, like ice forming over a lake, solid enough to bear weight, cold enough to kill. She began running at 5 a.m., pounding out miles along the lakefront trail, while Chicago woke up around her. The physical pain helped. Each burning breath, each protesting muscle, provided a counterpoint to the emotional agony that threatened to consume her. She ran until her lungs screamed, until her legs nearly buckled, until the only thing she could feel was her body's rebellion against motion. At work, colleagues noticed the change. The warm, or at least cordial, Diane, who'd occasionally asked about their families, was gone, replaced by someone harder, more remote. She won cases with even more brutal efficiency than before, cross-examining witnesses until they wept, finding weaknesses in opposing arguments with surgical precision. Her billable hours increased 20%. Partners whispered that she'd become their most effective attorney and their most concerning one. She stopped sleeping in her bedroom, the room she'd shared with Marcus for 2 decades. Instead, she set up a cot in her home office, surrounded by evidence of her investigation. Sleep came in brief, restless fragments, always punctuated by dreams where Maya drowned over and over, each time with a different face. The private investigator she'd hired, Jamal Carter, born August 3, 1978, in Chicago, Illinois, a former Chicago PD detective who'd gone private after exposing corruption in his department, reported back weekly. He'd tracked Maya and Marcus to a neighborhood in Seattle's Capitol Hill area, where they shared a modest 2-bedroom apartment. They attended prenatal appointments together. They shopped for baby furniture. They lived, to all appearances, like any ordinary couple preparing for their first child. No evidence of them meeting before 2019, Jamal told her during one meeting. I've checked Marcus's phone records, credit cards, everything. The first documented contact is a coffee shop receipt from Seattle in September 2019, when Maya would have been 21. Which means either they were very careful before that, Diane reasoned, or they're telling the truth about the timeline. Or, Jamal offered carefully, they communicated through channels we can't trace. Burner phones, encrypted apps, cash transactions. Diane nodded. She'd considered that. What about the wedding? December 15th. Small ceremony at a private estate outside Seattle. 30 guests. I have the vendor list if you want to interview any of them. No, Diane had already decided. I'm going to attend. Jamal raised his eyebrows. They invited you. They invited me. I declined. But I've changed my mind. She leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. I want to see it. I want to witness them making this permanent. And I want them to know I'm watching. She'd been reading Stoic philosophy, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. The ancient wisdom resonated with her lawyer's mind. Focus on what you can control, accept what you cannot, maintain discipline in the face of chaos. She'd spent her life building expertise in controlling outcomes. Now that control had been revealed as illusory, she had to find a new foundation. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius had written that nearly 2,000 years ago, but it felt contemporary to Diane's situation. She couldn't control that Maya had left, couldn't change the 6 years of grief, couldn't make Marcus unlove her daughter or unfather her grandchild. But she could control her response. She could choose not to be destroyed by this. She could choose to become something harder, something that couldn't be hurt because it had already survived the worst imaginable pain. Dr. Patricia Chen, born December 1967 in San Francisco, California, the therapist Keisha had insisted Diane see, called this dissociative coping. Diane called it survival. You're compartmentalizing the trauma, Dr. Chen observed during one session. Putting it in a box and continuing to function. That works short-term, but eventually the box breaks open. Then I'll build a stronger box, Diane replied. She started learning things. How to access sealed court records. How to trace cryptocurrency transactions. How to recognize patterns in phone metadata. She taught herself skills she'd never needed before. Skills that transformed her from a corporate attorney into something more dangerous. She also started documenting everything. Every lie she uncovered, every discrepancy, every piece of evidence that suggested Marcus and Maya's story didn't hold up to scrutiny. She didn't know yet what she'd do with the information, but she knew that knowledge was power, and she intended to have all of it. Her relationship with her own past shifted too. She revisited memories of Maya's childhood with new eyes, looking for signs she'd missed. Had Maya always been uncomfortable? Had Diane really been as demanding as her daughter claimed? The evidence was mixed. Yes, she'd pushed Maya toward excellence. But she'd also attended every debate tournament, every parent-teacher conference, every small moment that constituted raising a child. She'd been present, if not always soft. The criticism stung because it contained truth, and also because it was incomplete. Diane had been a black woman in predominantly white spaces, trying to teach her daughter to survive those same spaces. Every high standard, every correction, every insistence on excellence had been armor she was trying to pass down. Maya had interpreted it as rejection. Diane had intended it as protection. Neither interpretation was wholly right or wrong, but that nuance felt irrelevant now. By early December, Diane had achieved a kind of cold clarity. She understood, intellectually, why Maya had left. She could even understand, in a distant way, how the relationship with Marcus had developed. Trauma bonding, forbidden love, the appeal of someone who'd always seen you as special. But understanding didn't equal forgiveness, and it certainly didn't equal acceptance. She booked a flight to Seattle for December 14th, the day before the wedding. She didn't tell Marcus or Maya. She simply informed Keisha, updated her will, removing both Marcus and Maya as beneficiaries, and packed a single bag. "What are you hoping to accomplish?" Keisha asked when they met for coffee the day before Diane's flight. "Witness," Diane replied, "and possibly destroy. I haven't decided yet." "That's not healthy, Dee." "Healthy died 6 years ago." Diane sipped her espresso. "I'm not looking for healing. I'm looking for equilibrium." "By attending your daughter's wedding to your husband?" "Ex-husband. The divorce papers will be filed the day I return." "And Maya?" Diane was quiet for a long moment. "Maya made her choice. She chose Marcus over me. She chose a fantasy over reality. She chose to let me suffer rather than face an uncomfortable truth. Those aren't the choices of a daughter who loves her mother. So she's not my daughter anymore. She's just a young woman who used to live in my house." "You don't mean that." "I do." And the terrifying thing was, Diane did mean it. She'd performed a kind of emotional surgery on herself, excising the parts that still hoped for reconciliation or understanding. What remained was purpose. And the purpose was to ensure that Marcus and Maya didn't get to rewrite history, didn't get to paint themselves as star-crossed lovers whose only sin was wanting to be together. She wanted them to know that someone remembered the truth. Someone knew what they'd done, and someone would never, ever let them forget. The Seattle rain was exactly as advertised, constant, gray, erasing the boundary between sky and ground. Diane's rental car navigated streets lined with coffee shops and tech startups, the city's relentless modernity, a stark contrast to Chicago's more historical architecture. This was Maya's chosen home, the place where she'd rebuilt herself outside of Diane's shadow. Diane had booked a hotel downtown, but she spent most of December 14th driving past the addresses Jamal had provided. Maya and Marcus's apartment in Capitol Hill, the community center where Maya apparently volunteered, teaching poetry to at-risk youth. The cafe where she'd worked for 2 years after arriving. She watched their ordinary life from a distance, this parallel existence that had flourished while Diane had been dying. Maya emerged from the apartment around 11 a.m., her pregnant belly preceding her. She wore casual clothes, leggings, and an oversized sweater, and walked with the particular waddle of late pregnancy. She looked happy, healthy, completely at peace. Diane gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles ached. The rage that surfaced was so pure, so blinding, that for a moment she understood crimes of passion. How easy it would be to step on the gas, to erase this impossible vision, to make her daughter dead in reality instead of just in memory. But she didn't. She sat in her rental car, watching, breathing through the fury until it settled back into something manageable. Her phone rang. "Marcus," she answered. "What?" "Diane, Maya told me you blocked her number." His voice was cautious, feeling out the terrain. Are you coming tomorrow? I'm already here. A pause. In Seattle. Where else would I be? You invited me to the wedding. I'm attending. Marcus seemed genuinely surprised. We didn't think you'd actually come. You don't know what I'll do anymore, Diane said. Turns out you never did. We'd like to see you before the ceremony. Can you come by the apartment tonight? For dinner? The invitation was so absurd that Diane almost laughed. Dinner. As if they were a normal family navigating normal tensions. What are we having? Reconciliation casserole? Diane, I'll come, she interrupted. 7 o'clock? Yes. 7 is good. Thank you. This means… She hung up before he could finish. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Diane reviewed her notes one more time, ensuring she had every fact memorized, every discrepancy cataloged. She rehearsed what she might say, different scenarios and responses. But ultimately, she knew she'd have to improvise. Confrontation was jazz, not classical music. You needed to know the fundamentals, but respond to the moment. At 6:45 p.m., she parked outside their apartment building. It was a charming structure, older brick with modern renovations, the kind of place young professionals gravitated toward. She climbed the stairs to Unit 3B, her heels clicking against wood, each step a countdown. She knocked. Marcus answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting by the door. He looked older than he had 2 weeks ago, new lines of stress carved around his mouth. Diane, thank you for coming. She stepped inside without greeting him. The apartment was small but nicely furnished. Bookshelves crammed with volumes, art on the walls, a dining table set for 3. Maya emerged from what was presumably the bedroom, wearing a flowing dress that accommodated her belly. They faced each other, mother and daughter, separated by 6 feet and 6 years. Mama, Maya began. Don't. Diane raised a hand. Don't call me that. You lost that privilege when you let me bury a stranger. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but Diane felt nothing. The part of her that had softened at her daughter's pain was gone, excised. Let's sit, Marcus suggested, gesturing to the table. I made lasagna. Your favorite? My favorite, Diane repeated slowly, is not being lied to for 6 years. But apparently, that wasn't on the menu. She sat anyway. They'd laid out the meal. Lasagna, salad, bread. A bottle of wine for Marcus and Diane, sparkling water for Maya. It could have been any family dinner, except for the apocalypse hanging in the air. We wanted to explain more, Marcus started as they served themselves. To help you understand, I understand perfectly, Diane interrupted. A 17-year-old with a crush on her adoptive father concocted a plan to fake her death. The adoptive father, instead of being an adult and getting her help, facilitated the plan and then entered into a sexual relationship with her the moment it became legally defensible. Together, they've built a life on the foundation of my trauma. What am I missing? It wasn't like that, Maya insisted. I wasn't some confused kid with a crush. I loved him, really loved him, and he tried to do the right thing. The right thing would have been telling me, Diane said. The right thing would have been family therapy, honest conversations, addressing the problem like adults, not conspiracy and fraud and letting me believe my daughter drowned. You wouldn't have understood, Maya's voice rose. You would have sent me away, gotten me therapy to fix me, made it about how it reflected on you. You never cared about what I actually wanted, only about what looked good, what maintained your perfect image. And what you wanted, Diane said coldly, was to destroy me? Because that's what you did. I stopped living when you died. I went through the motions, work, sleep, repeat, but there was nothing left inside. You killed me, Maya, not physically, but every way that mattered. The accusation hung in the air. Maya wiped at her eyes, her face crumpling. I didn't want that. I just wanted to be free." "Then you're a coward," Diane said. "Freedom doesn't require deception. You could have left, could have told me you needed distance, that you were moving away, that our relationship wasn't working. You could have been honest." "Would you have let me go?" Maya challenged. "Really? Or would you have guilted me, manipulated me, made it impossible to leave without feeling like I was abandoning you?" The question struck deeper than Diane wanted to admit, because the honest answer was complicated. She might have tried to convince Maya to stay, might have deployed every argument and emotional appeal available, but she would have, eventually, let her go. Wouldn't she? "We'll never know," Diane finally said. "Because you didn't give me the chance. You chose the nuclear option, and that choice tells me everything I need to know about how little I meant to you." Marcus interjected. "Diane, you meant everything to her. Still do. That's why she's been so torn up about this. Why she's been begging me to help facilitate a reunion." "A reunion," Diane repeated. "At your wedding, where I'm expected to, what? Celebrate? Give my blessing? Watch my daughter marry the man I've loved for 25 years and pretend it's normal?" "It is normal for us," Maya said, quietly. "We're happy. We're building a family. I know it's unconventional, but we're not hurting anyone." "You're hurting me." The words exploded out of Diane with volcanic force. "Every second you exist together, every moment of happiness you build, is acid poured on an open wound. You want me to celebrate your joy? Your joy is constructed from my suffering." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the Seattle rain seemed to pause. "I came here tonight," Diane continued, her voice returning to its controlled courtroom tone, "to tell you both something. I've spent the last 2 weeks investigating, and I've found inconsistencies." Marcus went very still. "Inconsistencies?" "Financial records that don't match your timeline. Evidence of communication between you and Maya dating back to 2000, not 2019. Witnesses who remember Marcus visiting Seattle multiple times in 2016 and 2018, when Maya would have been 17 and 18. And a very interesting email thread between you and someone named Jay Morrison, who I've now identified as Dr. James Morrison, a plastic surgeon in Miami who specializes in, among other things, helping people disappear." The color drained from Marcus's face. Maya looked between them, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that your father, your husband, has been lying about when your relationship started. I have evidence suggesting you two were involved before you left for Seattle, which means he was sleeping with you when you were a minor, which means he's a criminal." "That's not true," Marcus stood abruptly. "I never touched her before she turned 18. Never." "Then explain the hotel receipts from Seattle in August 2018, 2 months after Shiar died. Explain the phone records showing calls between your cell and a Seattle number registered to a fake name, but traced to an apartment 3 blocks from where Maya was living. Explain the financial transfers that started in June 2018, immediately after her disappearance, in amounts that exceed what a 17-year-old would need to figure things out." Diane pulled out her phone, displaying documents she'd uploaded. "I have everything, Marcus. Months of evidence. A timeline that proves you've been lying about the nature of your relationship with Maya. And tomorrow, during what's supposed to be your wedding, I'm going to the Seattle Police Department and filing a report." "You're bluffing," Marcus said, but his voice wavered. "I'm a lawyer," Diane replied. "I don't bluff. I present evidence." Maya stood, her hands protectively over her belly. "Mama, please. Even if some of the details are wrong, even if the timing isn't exactly what Daddy said, the core truth is the same. We love each other. We're having a baby. We're getting married. Can't that be enough?" "No," Diane said simply. "Because the core truth isn't love. It's betrayal. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. She stood, preparing to leave. Marcus moved toward her. "Diane, wait. Please. Let's talk about this. We're done talking." She headed for the door, then paused. "I'll be at your wedding tomorrow, and I'll be watching. Every vow, every smile, every moment you pretend this is normal. I'll be there, reminding you that I know the truth, and that someday, so will everyone else." She left them standing in their apartment, their happy life suddenly looking a lot more precarious. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. at a private estate overlooking Puget Sound. Diane arrived at 1:30, dressed in black, not as a statement, but because it felt appropriate for a funeral. Because that's what this was, in a way. The burial of her last illusion about who Maya and Marcus were. The estate was beautiful in the way Seattle properties often were, glass and wood, and nature integrated with architectural precision. Marcus's influence was obvious in the design. Guests mingled on a terrace, the gray sky actually cooperating by holding back rain. Diane recognized some faces, Marcus's colleagues, a few distant relatives who'd apparently been told some version of the truth. No one from Diane's side of the family. No one from Maya's past life in Chicago. She signed the guest book with deliberate care. Diane Harper, mother of the bride. A young woman, presumably the wedding coordinator, approached nervously. "Mrs. Harper, I'm supposed to escort you to your seat." "I'll find my own seat," Diane replied, scanning the arrangement. Chairs set up in rows facing an arbor wrapped in white flowers. She chose the back row, edge seat, optimal position for observing without being observed. Guests filed in. The officiant took his position. Music started, something instrumental and modern, not the traditional wedding march. Marcus appeared first, walking down the aisle alone, looking solemn in a charcoal suit. He saw Diane and stumbled slightly, recovering with visible effort. Then Maya appeared. She wore ivory, not white, perhaps acknowledging that this situation was too morally ambiguous for white. The dress was simple, elegant, empire-waisted to accommodate her belly. Her hair, natural and voluminous, was crowned with small flowers. She looked radiant. She looked happy. She looked like a bride. Diane felt nothing. The numbness she'd cultivated held firm. The ceremony began. The officiant talked about love transcending boundaries, about finding your soulmate in unexpected places, about family being who you choose. Every word felt aimed at Diane, explaining and justifying what they'd done. Then came the vows. Marcus went first. "Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "6 years ago, you came to me and asked me to help you find yourself. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Helping you leave, knowing it would hurt Diane, knowing it might destroy our family. But I did it because I loved you. Because you deserved the chance to become who you were meant to be, outside of expectations and obligations." He paused, gathering himself. "And then, when you'd become that person, when you'd grown into the incredible woman standing before me, you gave me the gift of your love, not as a daughter to a father, but as a woman to a man. And I tried to resist. I tried to do the right thing. But you taught me that sometimes the right thing and the true thing aren't the same. Our truth is that we belong together. Always have. And I promise to love you, to honor you, to be your partner and your equal for the rest of my life." Maya was crying openly now. So were several guests. Diane remained dry-eyed. Maya's turn. "Daddy," she caught herself, smiled through tears. "Marcus, you're the first person who ever saw me, really saw me. Not as an achievement or a project or a reflection of someone else's dreams, just as Maya. And when I was drowning, metaphorically, before I almost drowned literally, you threw me a lifeline. You helped me save myself." She took his hands. "I know what we have is complicated. I know people won't understand. I know especially that Mama, her voice broke on the word, her eyes finding Diane in the back row. I know she's hurt, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. But I can't apologize for loving you. I can't apologize for choosing happiness over obligation. And I promise to love you fiercely, to build a family with you, to create the kind of home where our children can be whoever they are, without judgment or impossible standards. The officiant asked if anyone objected to the union. This was Diane's moment. She could stand, could voice her objections, could present her evidence, could destroy them in front of everyone they'd invited to witness their love. She stayed seated, silent, because she'd realized something in that moment. Destroying them now would make them martyrs. Star-crossed lovers persecuted by a vindictive ex-wife. They'd fold her objections into their narrative, proof that they'd been right to exclude her. No, she had a better plan. The ceremony concluded. Marcus kissed Maya with a tenderness that might have been beautiful if it weren't so wrong. They walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Maya's hand on her belly, protecting the life growing there. Their child. His child. Her grandchild. At the reception, Diane nursed a glass of wine and watched. Marcus and Maya made the rounds, greeting guests, laughing, touching each other with the easy affection of established lovers. They avoided Diane's corner of the room, but she caught them glancing her way repeatedly, as if ensuring she hadn't vanished. Dinner was served. Toasts were made. Marcus's best man, a colleague from his Atlanta days, told stories about Marcus's integrity, his kindness, his unwavering commitment to doing right by people. The irony was apparently lost on everyone but Diane. Maya's maid of honor was a woman named Sophia, a poet she'd met in Seattle. Sophia talked about Maya's bravery in starting over, in choosing herself, and refusing to be defined by others' expectations. Each word was a knife, subtly aimed at Diane. Then the best man said, "And now, I believe Maya's mother would like to say a few words." Diane hadn't planned to speak. She'd assumed she wouldn't be invited to. But apparently, Maya had insisted. One last olive branch, one last attempt at reconciliation. She stood, walked to the microphone, looked out at the 30 faces watching her expectantly, many nervous about what the scorned ex-wife might say. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady. "I have to admit, I didn't prepare anything. I didn't know if I'd be welcome here or if my presence would be wanted. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak." She paused, making eye contact with Maya, then Marcus. 6 years ago, I lost my daughter. She drowned during a cruise, and I thought I'd never recover. The grief was indescribable. It hollowed me out, made me question everything I'd done as a mother, every choice I'd made, every way I'd failed her. Guests shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't typical wedding toast material. But today, Diane continued, I realized my daughter didn't drown. She just chose a different life, a life without me. And I have to respect that choice, even though it broke me, even though it destroyed my marriage, my sense of reality, my ability to trust anything or anyone. Maya was crying. Marcus had his arm around her, protective. "So here's my toast," Diane said, raising her glass. "To Maya and Marcus. May your love be everything you believe it to be. May your child grow up happy and healthy. And may you never, ever know what it feels like to be betrayed by the people you love most in the world. Because that knowledge, that particular kind of pain, is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. Even you." She drank, set down her glass. "Congratulations on your wedding. I won't be staying for cake." She walked out to absolute silence. No one followed. No one stopped her. In the parking lot, she sat in her rental car, watching through the windows as the reception continued. Maya and Marcus huddled together, probably discussing what she'd said. Guests gossiped and speculated. Life moved on. Diane pulled out her phone and called Jamal Carter. "It's done. File the report with Seattle PD tomorrow. Everything we found. The financial records. The timeline discrepancies. All of it. Let them investigate. Let Marcus and Maya explain themselves to people who don't love them." "You're sure?" Jamal asked. "I've never been more sure of anything." She hung up and drove back to her hotel. Tomorrow, she'd fly back to Chicago. She'd file for divorce. She'd remove every trace of Marcus and Maya from her life. She'd become the woman she needed to be to survive this. Harder, colder, impervious to the kind of pain that came from loving people. The Stoics were right. You couldn't control what others did. You could only control your response. And Diane chose to respond with a ruthlessness that matched what had been done to her. Justice, after all, was just revenge, refined by civilization. And she was nothing if not civilized. The Seattle Police Department opened an investigation 3 days after the wedding. Diane's detailed report, backed by Jamal's findings, gave them enough to proceed. The focus was on potential statutory rape. If Marcus and Maya had been involved before Maya turned 18, Washington state law defined it as a felony. Second-degree rape of a child carried a sentence of up to 10 years. Marcus hired a criminal defense attorney. Maya, now 8 months pregnant, went into preterm labor from the stress and delivered a daughter on January 2nd, 2023. They named her Zora after Zora Neale Hurston. Diane learned this from news articles, not from them. The story had leaked. Chicago architect accused of statutory rape after teen faked death, and quickly became national news. The optics were terrible. A successful black man, a young black woman, an older ex-wife seeking revenge. The narrative split along predictable lines. Some saw Marcus as a predator who'd groomed his adoptive daughter. Others saw Diane as a bitter ex, weaponizing the legal system. Maya was either a victim or a manipulator, depending on who was talking. No narrative captured the full complexity. The investigation dragged on for months. Marcus's attorney argued that the evidence was circumstantial. Hotel receipts didn't prove sexual contact. Financial transfers could be innocent support. Phone calls could be paternal check-ins. The prosecution struggled to find concrete proof of when the relationship became romantic versus familial. Meanwhile, Diane's divorce proceeded with brutal efficiency. She kept the brownstone, half their assets, and Marcus's pension. He didn't contest it. He was too busy trying to avoid prison. In March, the prosecutor offered Marcus a deal: plead guilty to contributing to the delinquency of a minor, accept a suspended sentence and probation, register as a sex offender, and the statutory rape charges would be dropped. It wasn't the outcome Diane had hoped for, but it was something, a permanent mark on his record, an admission of wrongdoing. Marcus refused. "I didn't do what they're accusing me of," he told reporters. "I won't plead guilty to a crime I didn't commit." The case went to trial in June. Diane attended every day, sitting in the gallery, watching as lawyers dissected her life, her marriage, her daughter. Maya testified, visibly uncomfortable, insisting that nothing sexual had happened until she was 23. Marcus testified the same. Their stories aligned perfectly. Too perfectly, the prosecutor argued, suggesting rehearsed lies. But without physical evidence, without witnesses, without anything beyond circumstantial financial records, the jury couldn't be convinced beyond reasonable doubt. After 4 days of deliberation, they returned with a verdict. Not guilty on all counts. Marcus wept. Maya wept. Their attorneys celebrated. Outside the courthouse, they made a statement about justice prevailing, about vindictive ex-wives, about how their love had survived persecution. Diane watched the press conference from her hotel room. She felt nothing. Not disappointment, not rage, not grief. Just the cold satisfaction of having done what she'd set out to do. Ensure that Marcus and Maya's perfect love story would always be tainted. They'd won legally, but socially, professionally, they'd lost. Marcus's architecture firm had quietly asked him to step down. Maya's volunteer position had been suspended indefinitely. Their names were forever linked with scandal. And Diane? She returned to Chicago, returned to work, returned to her life, a life that looked remarkably similar to how it had been before, except now she was officially alone. Keisha tried to convince her to take a vacation, see a therapist, process everything. You're not okay, Dee. You're functioning, but you're not okay. I don't need to be okay, Diane replied. I need to be competent. And I am. She threw herself into work with even more intensity. Made senior partner, took on the firm's most challenging cases, built a reputation as the lawyer you called when you needed someone fearless, someone who wouldn't flinch at doing what needed to be done. She sold the brownstone, too many ghosts, and moved to a sleek high-rise on the waterfront. She kept Maya's room boxed up in storage, unable to discard it, but unwilling to keep it close. She dated briefly, a fellow attorney who didn't ask too many questions about her past. It didn't last. Nothing did. On the anniversary of Maya's death, June 8, 2023, Diane visited the cemetery where the stranger was buried under her daughter's name. I'm sorry, she told the stranger. You deserved better than to be a prop in someone else's drama. I hope wherever you are, whatever your real name was, someone loved you. Someone mourned you properly. She left flowers, lilies, because Maya had always hated them, and this grave belonged to someone else. She never contacted Maya or Marcus again. They existed to her only as case studies in betrayal, cautionary tales she'd reference occasionally when discussing trust and deception with colleagues. But late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, Diane would sometimes pull up Maya's social media, public accounts she hadn't blocked because she wanted to see, wanted to witness the life her daughter had chosen. Zora's first smile, Zora's first steps, Maya's poetry published in small literary journals, Marcus's sustainable housing project in Tacoma. They looked happy, truly happy. The scandal had become background noise, something people remembered but stopped talking about. They were building a life, the three of them, in their Seattle apartment. And Diane had, what? Her career, her reputation, her righteous anger, the cold comfort of having stood on principle, of having refused to accept the unacceptable. The Stoics would call it virtue, doing what was right regardless of outcome, maintaining integrity in a world that demanded compromise. But in her darkest moments, Diane wondered if the Stoics had been wrong, if some compromises were worth making, if some pain was worth swallowing to keep the people you loved in your life. She'd chosen truth over relationship, justice over family, principle over peace. And now she lived with the consequences, a beautifully appointed apartment that echoed with silence, professional respect from people who'd never know her heart, and the absolute certainty that she'd been right, even if being right had cost her everything. 2 years after the wedding, on a cold November evening in 2026, Diane received an unexpected package. No return address, just her name and office address, written in handwriting she'd recognize anywhere. Inside was a book, a slim volume of poetry titled, "The Daughter I Was, the Woman I Became." Maya's name was on the cover, and inside, a dedication. For Mama. I'm sorry it had to be this way. Diane sat in her office, 45 floors above Chicago, and read her daughter's words. The poems were about mothers and daughters, about expectations and identity, about the violence of love that demands perfection, about faking death to find life, about the man who'd helped her breathe. Diane booked a flight for the following month. She didn't know what she'd say when she got there. Didn't know if she could sit in a room with Marcus without feeling rage. Didn't know if seeing Maya with her daughter would heal something or break what little remained. But she knew that the alternative, continuing on this path of righteous isolation, was another kind of death. And she'd already died once, 6 years ago, when she'd learned her daughter had drowned. Maybe it was time to try living again, even if it hurt, even if it meant compromising the principles she'd built her life on, even if it meant accepting a reality that would never feel entirely right. The Stoics were wise, but Ubuntu was wiser. I am because we are. And maybe Diane was nothing without the messy, complicated, infuriating people who made up her family. She packed a bag for Seattle, and for the first time in years, she felt something that might have been hope. Diane Harper's story forces us to confront impossible questions. Would you have attended the wedding or stayed away entirely? Would you have pursued criminal charges or let it go? Could you have forgiven Maya and Marcus, or is some betrayal unforgivable? And most importantly, what does it mean to be a good parent? To love without conditions, or to maintain boundaries even when it costs you the relationship? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, made you think, made you feel, made you question your own relationships, please like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.